We have a really exciting episode today. Reverend Michael Pergola is here, as well as Reverend Jane Galloway. But first, we're going to talk about Dr. Oprah Winfrey. Did you hear about that? And what a gay weekend we had. Stay tuned. We'll talk about that coming up.
It's time to live my bliss. I want to walk in the open. Gotta live life.
Today, we have amazing guests. We're talking about a fascinating topic of world religions. We have Reverend Michael Pergola here today. We also have Reverend Dr. Jane Galloway. Please give it up for them. I'm so thankful that they could be here today. Thank you so much. But first, we're going to start, as always, with incredibly neat news. So I want to get started by talking about some of the hot topics for today. As you may have heard about, we have gay marriage passed in New York City and New York State. Oh, finally, we've been waiting forever for this. This is the largest state outside of New England that finally has gay marriage outside of Iowa. Of course, New York is larger than Iowa, but this is where it's voted in, which makes it significant. It was a populist thing, which is wonderful. All those Republicans, so this is a little message to all the Republican senators across the states that are thinking about the idea of, oh, I might not get elected back in if I do this. The polls are on your side. You can do it. You can vote for gay marriage. It's okay now. We're proof. We're still around. Look, there's nothing happened. We're here. We've done it. We've done it. And think about this. We have lagged behind Catholic strongholds such as Portugal, Mexico City, Spain, Argentina, and Brazil. So let's get caught up. We're America, right? Right? Exactly. Thank you. I know. Karen Leigh, a senior staff attorney at the Gay and Lesbian Advocates Defenders, explains this. Everyone agrees that religious institutions have complete autonomy to decide which marriages to solemnize and celebrate. And the bill that we did in the New York Senate already reiterates those protections. So some of the opponents of same-sex marriage are trying to stretch this religious exemption to try to protect the caterers, reception halls, and musicians who want to refuse to provide services to gay couples getting married. No. Thank you. Did you hear my phrase? Caterers, reception halls, and musicians. I think it speaks for itself. Who do you think those people are? Well, I wanted to show you a picture that was taken this weekend from in New York City, the gay marriage. If you don't like gay marriage, blame straight people. They're the ones who keep having gay babies. If that's not true, I don't know what is, exactly. So one sad piece of news this weekend, Neil Patrick Harris is engaged. So he's off the market. David Burke and him are going to say I do together, but now they can. That's the beauty of this. They're welcome to do that. And also, that picture was a reminder that we had Gay Pride this weekend in New York City, and it was amazing, beautiful. The front of the parade had Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's the governor who signed off on this. So, yeah, exactly. Thank you to Andrew. Thank you. In addition to Christine Quinn, who is an out lesbian who's in charge of the city council, and Mayor Michael Bloomberg was there as well. And there was, Senator Tom Dwayne, am I saying that right? Yeah, Tom Dwayne. He was also there, who is a big voice in saying, where are our rights, where are our rights? He happens to be my senator where I live as well. But he used to be, I just found this out, the old Christine Quinn was Tom Dwayne. Interesting, I know. So he's had some history. So I don't know if you heard, but Oprah Winfrey is now Dr. Oprah Winfrey. I know, right? She got an honorary doctorate from the University of Free State in South Africa on Friday. And you know what? That's how I'm going to get my doctorate degree. So all you universities out there, I'm ready for an honorary doctorate. Please give me a call. Finally, you may have heard about this, Spider-Man opened. Ah! This is, for those who are not New Yorkers, there's a Broadway musical called Spider-Man where, I don't know, everyone got injured. Everyone fell off the, Spider-Man famously was supposed to like dangle, and he dangled and fell, and it was like, oh my God, it was, he actually got hurt, but he came back. He's like, yeah, I want to do this. I can't wait to get back in the show. They were really supportive of this. They finally redid it, and they edited things, and they fixed problems, and June 14th, they finally said, okay, we're open. Our doors are open. We're here. Who came? Bill Clinton was there. Spike Lee, Andrew Lloyd Webber, Steve Martin. I mean, it's very popular. Gina Gershon, Liam Neeson. It took $70 million to create this thing. 183 preview performances. Usually there's 30. Yeah, so 183 is significant. So as part of the conversation of what does it cost to open a musical, let's talk about this. Let's assume that it costs about $1 million a week to put up the show. This is after, this is a New York Times article. Catherine Rampell interviewed a bunch of producers about this. It takes about $1 million a week to do this kind of show with the actors, musicians, stagehand, rent, and electricity bills. There are 1,932 seats in that theater. So at $111 a seat, and with 96% of the seats filled for 8 shows a week, that ends up being $1,646. And so after that, you have to take off the profit that goes to pension plans and credit card charges, $1.4 million. 35% of that goes to royalties. So you're losing a whole nother chunk of change. That leaves $313,000 for you to each week to take, assuming 96% and $111 a seat. So it's going to take 4 years. Over 4 years for them to get back their initial investment. So if you like Bono and the Edge, then you really need to come and see this show. Just to give some perspective, Lion King and Wicked have done that. They're good companies. They had a franchise behind them, and they're still running. But there are other shows, like Little Mermaid ran for about 1.5 years. Shrek the Musical, just over a year. And The Cape Man, who Paul Simon supported, ran for only 2 months. So support Spider-Man if you really love them. I think it should be interesting. I mean, has anyone seen it? Yeah, you did or did not see it?
I saw it right when it's been first
Was it, oh no? Well, hopefully it's supposed to be changed. The plot's been redone, but we have one naysayer, so Bono, I'm sorry. But you can text me later. We'll talk about this. There was a really interesting article about the end of gender. There was a couple, Kathy Witterick and David Stocker, are raising their 4-month-old child, Storm, without revealing the gender of the baby. There's a model, an androgynous model, whose name is Andrzej Pajic, as well as, this right here you're looking at is Mirna Buniak, who is a female. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see Andrzej, who's an androgynous Australian model who worked both the male and female runways at the Paris fashion shows earlier this year. So there's that. A recent J. Crew catalog drew national attention when it featured a young boy with his toenails painted pink. There's all this talk about what does gender mean. We're not talking about sex here, because you might be born with genitalia of men or women, but what do you identify as? And there's a lot of discussion nowadays, especially in New York City, where a lot of trans people feel comfortable being. They come here because there's a lot of protections and conversation about that. And they're asking, does gender really matter? Is it really something that is important? I'm actually someone that participated, if you've heard about this. J. Crew had a sting where they sent in a trans person who was female to male. She was in transition. And he would go in, apply for a job. I went in 15 minutes later to apply for the same job. His resume was better than mine, and we found out after going to 20 retail spots, J. Crew was one of the places that got discriminated against, and there was a press release about this, and the point was, it's just as a message to all the companies that already have protections to be careful about this. There's still people not following these rules, so be aware of that. Getting back to the gender conversation, there was both sides of the story where New York City has Dennis Walcott, who was the New York City Public Schools head, has asked for more single-sex public schools. So there is this idea. This is happening also in Chicago. And Tampa is doing the same thing. But then there is the name I've lost, Spade. Dean Spade, a female-to-male transsexual who's an advocate for transgender rights, asking, please, something as simple as unisex restrooms. Our ceiling almost caved in. For unisex, it's just a cord. A cord just went, burp, burp, but I had to look. Just having more unisex restrooms is something that can be very helpful and sensitive to transgender people. So I thought that was a nice thing. Yes, right. Exactly. I'm thinking about that cord. One last thing. You know the Nike swoosh? You know, check, exactly. So let's just say you were a Nike executive. How much would you have paid to come up with that swoosh? Any numbers? How much would you have been willing to pay as a big company? How much would you have paid a graphic designer to come up with that big swoosh? What's that? $1. $1? Yeah, she's like, it's just a check mark. The person that created it, her name is Carolyn Davidson. She received $35 to come up with that swoosh 40 years ago. But she got her due. A decade or so later, they gave her a diamond swoosh ring. And I'm like, oh, really? A diamond swoosh ring? And 500 shares of stocks. She's kept them. They're now worth $650,000. So you know what? Okay, I'll take that. So that's incredibly neat news for today. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at AbsolutelyTV. Give us any messages you have for us. You can email us at talktome@absolutelykTV.com. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to talk to Reverend Michael Pergola from One Spirit. So stay with us.
Hello, and welcome to the first installment of Breaking Through, a show about people, events, and ideas that pull us forward into a balanced and hopefully a better world. I'm your host, W.J. O'Reilly. Breaking Through aspires to taking us closer to discovering ways of transforming ourselves and the world without harming others or the planet. We leave you, we ask, what will you do to break through? For myself, W.J. O'Reilly, see you next time.
Welcome back. Even though New York City has long been known as non-religious, an estimated 6.8 million New Yorkers, or more than 83% of the population, were identified as being affiliated with some organized religion back in 2000. This rate of adherence is higher than all of the states except Louisiana. That's even higher than Utah. Of course, residents here belong to many different religions than those of the Bible Belt. So we wondered, what are all these religions about? To help us find out more, please help me welcome my first guest, co-founder of One Spirit Learning Alliance, Reverend Michael Pergola. Very excited to have you here.
Good to be here.
Oh no, it's an honor. Honor for me. I'm so glad you're here. So let's talk about how has religion changed in the past 90 years, 50 years?
You went back to the 50s. You couldn't go down to your corner store and find a Buddha, could you?
Oh no, I mean I wasn't here, but that's
Right,
good
if
to
you
hear.
remember, yeah. And now they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Religion used to be dogmatic. There were beliefs, this is what people did. And it made sense to people, it worked. But just as in the Buddha's time, actually, the old rituals, the old forms started to become less meaningful to so many people, particularly people in areas like New York, where people were very connected to the creative energies that were seeking to emerge. They were looking for something different. And we've had huge shifts in our understanding of religion over the last 50 or 60 years since the spiritual and sexual revolutions that started in the 60s.
Oh, that must have been nice. I wish I could have been there for that.
You would have, you missed it. It was
I would
good.
have loved that.
Yeah, that you would have, absolutely.
I've heard stories, and man, that sounds like something that I missed out on. Well, I first want to give an overview of all the major world religions, just to give an idea of where we're at. This is estimates from Encyclopedia Britannica. I didn't even know that was still around, but Encyclopedia Britannica. As you can see, the largest chunk of all the world religions is 2.1 billion, which is Christianity. The second is Islam, with 1.5 billion. Third is actually secular, non-religious, agnostic atheists, which is 1.1 billion. Then we get to Hinduism, 900 million, Chinese traditional religions, 394 million, followed by Buddhism at 376 million. I have 394 here. I have two different numbers here. And that was something when I was looking it up. There were different variations on it. It was some range of here, so I took the best estimate for those. And then you can see that it gets less and less and less. Something that was shocking to me, within that 88 million, you can find Judaism. 14 million is within Judaism. And I never knew that. I thought it was something that was much larger. And so part of what we're doing today is just talking about what are the deeper spiritual insights of each of these major world religions. For the sake of this conversation, since we're in New York, we're going to talk about the top 5 religions plus Judaism. So we're going to start with Christianity.
Well, it's interesting. Even in that enormous number of Christians, there's hundreds of sects. But at the core of all of the different Christian teachings is the understanding of Jesus. Now, that understanding varies. But I think contemporary people who are seeking to kind of make sense of life in the Christian tradition see Jesus as a great teacher, one of the first individuals to touch what some people have called the Christ consciousness. And in that consciousness, Jesus became very aware of his connection to what he called the Father. And it was a very sweet understanding. It was more like Daddy. It was that all-loving, all-embracing Father who looks out for you.
What a beautiful image to even hear that, to say Daddy as a, I mean, just hearing the word Daddy being used when talking about Jesus poses a whole different meaning than what I traditionally hear as the Father, which is formal in my mind.
Well, it was formal, and the fire and brimstone ideas that held sway for so long really don't present an accurate description of one of the greatest teachers of universal love who ever walked on the face of the planet. And that sense of love is really what brings us all together, what gives meaning to life, and I think is why Christianity has such a vibrant energy, even though some of the forms have begun to become less valid for many people in contemporary life.
Can we talk about Christ consciousness? What does that entail? What does that mean?
Well, you know, one of the great teachers of Christianity was St. Paul, and he talked about the Christ. And what we mean by the Christ is an energy that transcends or lets go of our separateness, an energy that really swims in that deliciousness of the Father, that attachment to the Daddy who embraces us in a way that we can embrace all of our fellow men, women, transgender, you know, gay, lesbian, etc., that is so embracing that it just obliterates all boundaries, all sense of separateness. And we'll see that that, in different flavors, that universal connectedness comes through in so many religions. But it comes through in Christianity as love, as a consciousness that just we can feel as an energy. That's a delicious kind of experience.
A delicious universal love, and I love that. I'm sure we'll be saying love a lot in this conversation. Let's go on to one of the most infamous, Islam, especially in New York City, of all places.
Well, I think, yeah, Islam is, as in all of these religions, there are many different people who express them and adhere to them, and some of the adherents have very narrow and limited views of those teachings. But Islam came into being in a society that was very, very primitive, very rough in the 6th century in the desert in the Arabian Peninsula, and it began to bring some order. And what they recognized was that God was not in a particular symbol. God was beyond all expressions. Allah was universal, was an understanding that can only be experienced through the beautiful and poetic language of the Quran. So it gave a common understanding to a people who had been separate and fighting and warring, and it built on the religions of the book, on Christianity and Judaism to a large degree.
That's a great notion that it's more than can be expressed, that they understood even in a different time, place than what we understand life to be, that it's more than just a name, more than just one figure. It's more than we can understand.
It's the absolute, the eternal. And my favorite flavor of Islam is the Sufi teachings, who are the great Islamic mystics. They were really householders, people who were focused on the inner life, on love and justice, and on actually seeing every moment in life as a chance to unite the lover and the beloved. You know, the most popular poet in the United States is Rumi,
yes.
who is a Sufi,
yes.
and whose poetry is just an ecstatic breaking of all boundaries in the heart that just completely understand that the divine infuses everything.
Some of my best poetry experiences has been of Rumi. Let's talk about bringing God into everyday life. Where does that come in with Islam?
Well, I think the Sufis in particular were householders. You know, in the Christian tradition, you know, in the West, religion was originally very monastic. And they were the clergy, and they were separated from the laity. And there was a sense of separation. And that's true also in most of the kind of everyday parochial forms of pretty much all of the religions. But the Sufi sheiks, the Sufi mystics, wanted to break down that barrier. So they were weavers, they were bookmakers, they were people who made cloth, various kind of people who maybe, you know, farmers, people who, you know, prepared the grains. So they did a lot of everyday tasks. They had regular jobs, but their night jobs, their real jobs, were to be lovers of the divine.
Their real jobs.
And to express that to each other. And to bring that, to unlock the keys to our separateness, and to experience the bliss of divine union, which Rumi articulates so extraordinarily beautifully.
Which you can find all over the internet for those that are even thinking about it. Rumi is spelled R-U-M-I.
R-U-M-I.
And so if you Google Rumi, there's so much beautiful poetry in what he has to offer.
One of the greatest religious teachers of all time, who 30 years ago, none of us would have heard of Rumi.
Not one
so
person.
It's amazing what's happening. The wisdom that's coming down to us is extraordinary.
Let's look at the third religion with 900 million, Hinduism.
And you know where all those 900 million people live for the most part?
For the most part, in India?
In India.
Yeah.
So Hinduism is a very interesting religion. It's, you could almost call it Indian, because it's so rooted in the subcontinent. And it was a religion that, again, has tremendous variation. And that shows up in a number of different things. You see many gods. In the deepest understanding of Hinduism, these different gods, Shiva, Shakti, Ganesh, Krishna, and you could go on and on and on.
No kidding.
But they really are expressions of different energies that take form. So underneath that sort of sense of difference is a sense that that oneness shows up in many different forms. You know, and in a sense, it's very Einsteinian, right? Energy and matter are the same. So energy takes form in different ways so that we as human beings can understand it. So Hinduism is a religion that is aimed at trying to understand human life. A couple of the things that are, I think, quite unusual about it is that it talks about different stages of life. And the spiritual quest takes on a different flavor in those different stages of life. As a youth, as a householder, as an older person who's now really going to say, what does life really mean? And through all of those stages, the idea is to achieve divine union. And I think back in the 60s, you would have remembered, if you were here, that the Beatles went to India.
Oh, yes, I read about that.
You read about it. You probably saw pictures, too.
Yes.
Yeah. And that was a huge influx of this extraordinary wisdom about how can we achieve divine union. Yoga studios everywhere.
Everywhere.
Chanting, kirtan, meditation. All of these were practical tools that the Eastern traditions really brought back to us in this country, beginning in the late 60s.
And I feel like yoga is one of the big reasons that I have learned about what Hinduism is. Let's move on to our next one, Buddhism, which I, at the beginning of time, used to get those two confused as they both were Eastern to me.
Well, Buddhism grew out of Hinduism. And it evolved at a time in history, just as we were talking about how has religion in this country changed. It's changed because the old forms and the old rituals lost their meaning for many people. Because what is religion? How we make sense of life, how we deal with the vicissitudes on the journey from birth to death, and how we handle the joys and sorrows in ways that allow us to make meaning for ourselves and to live skillfully with others. That's the best of religion. And Buddhism is frequently called the middle way, because much of religion either simply embraced the immediate flow of energy or rejected that in asceticism. And particularly back in the India of the Buddha's time, there was tremendous attempts to escape the body, because the body, which is our precious vehicle of experience, is also the source of all our suffering.
No kidding.
So what the Buddha understood,
I mean, I made a face about that because it is. It can be. Oh, yes, exactly.
That's right. In many different ways, emotionally as well as physically. The Buddha understood that none of this lasts, that there's a sense of impermanence to everything, but underneath that, there's also an awareness that everything is interconnected. And one of the key notions of Buddhism is what I like to call spaciousness or openness. It's traditionally called emptiness or sunyata. And it really is a capacity that if we can develop, if we can drop down into that space of peace, if we can let go of our attachments, not necessarily of our desires, but of a desire to have those desires satisfied.
Wow.
That's the trick.
Yes.
We all have desires, but are we okay with it when they don't get met? Because guess what? They don't all get met all the time.
That's right, they don't, but I will still try.
That's right.
That's what the beauty of this is. It allows.
It allows, and so it becomes a pathway to a deeper peace. That's why we see the repose of the Buddha. It's a call for inner peace, for tranquility, for equanimity, even in the midst of challenge and change and tribulation.
I love these conversations because this is what I hear about, even on a superficial level, conversations I have day to day, all come back to these deeper teachings that we're talking about finding inner peace. With that, let's go on to one of my favorites, because it's the most recent to me, that I learned at Sacred Center, is Taoism and Confucianism.
Well, I think that Confucianism was focused in the popular understanding, because we're just touching the surface.
No
These
kidding.
are
This is
enormous
an
wisdom
introduction.
traditions.
No kidding.
But deals with our social relations. One of the things we need to do is get along with each other. Not so easy, right?
No.
I mean, it's quite amazing.
I think it's easy, but
Well, if you
I'm not running this place.
if you went back to this great city of New York 150 years ago, there was enormous violence. The movie The Gangs of New York is really extraordinarily accurate. And one of the things that's most amazing is New York City is the first world city. It's the first place where people, despite many imperfections, despite the separation that we've experienced, the peace of which we've recently overcome with the legalization of gay marriage, as you talked about earlier, this is the first city where large numbers of people came together with a common sense of purpose and learned to get along with each other.
And you can see it. You can see the culturals as you're walking down the streets with New York City. It's everywhere you go.
And Taoism really talks about what it calls the way. So the way would be a deeper understanding of what we might call the divine, but it's really the way of things. It's the flow of life. It's an understanding in Taoism that there are different energies. There's a receptive energy, a birthing energy, an energy that waits, and there's an active energy, an energy that moves out and moves forward, and that both of those energies are important. And so Taoism encourages us to move into the flow, to let go of our attachment again. And Taoism and Buddhism have influenced each other in many, many ways, but to learn to do without doing, what's called wei wu wei, all right? And to understand that in that doing without doing, things become easy.
Even in your description, as you were talking about it, you could see the flow of how it begins and the birthing and then leveling, and all of this process goes with the flow. Wei wu wei, right?
Wei wu wei. And that flow incorporates the active and the receptives in the proper proportions in different times and in different places. And that's where, again, something we wouldn't have seen often 50 years ago is the symbol of Taoism. The yin and the yang symbol. It's everywhere.
I love yin and yang. So now let's talk about, finally, Judaism, which is relevant in New York City. Even though it is relatively small, we see it here all the time.
Well, interestingly enough, a significant proportion of the Jewish population around the world is in the New York metropolitan area. And interestingly enough as well, Judaism has had an enormous impact on our society. I've always been curious about why that is. Judaism really focuses on a number of things. Study is very important. Witnessing the importance of the teachings and learning from them, and the importance of community, because the teachings are generated from the community, which then takes form in the book. And interestingly enough, while we see a lot of tension today between Islam and Judaism, the reality is they're both religions of the book.
And when you say the book, meaning?
Well, the Quran in Islam, the Torah in Judaism. But the notion that we can capture the wisdom in writing. so we can transmit it. Some of the Eastern religions, while things were written down, they were often written down hundreds of years later, and the understanding of the book was different, and in many different nuances. So again, we're only touching the surface.
Absolutely.
But Judaism really focuses on the importance of relationship and the ability to pierce the divine through relationship. And the mystical aspects of Judaism, which have become very, very prevalent and in the news, Kabbalah and Hasidim, really focus on liberating the divine spark in each of us. And that divine spark is a piece of God that dropped into all of us at the creation, and that's locked inside us in a trapped form. And that when we liberate it, life is different. All life becomes bliss. And again, as in every one of these traditions, we lose our sense of separation. But I think Judaism, as best I understand it, has had the most profound impact for such a small group of people because,
Just about to ask that, absolutely.
as best I've ever understood it, the number of Nobel Prize winners, the number of influential people in the arts is enormous. The best explanation I've ever heard, and I've been curious about that, is that the Jewish people were the first people to treat their children well, to really value their children. You know, if you went back to the Roman empires, girls, for instance, were not very valued, people who were different. It wouldn't be unusual to leave a child to the wolves.
Oh,
it would
yeah,
be
right.
common. It wouldn't be unusual to present the child to the father to determine, do we keep this one or get rid of them? You know, 100 years ago in New York, child labor was terrible. First child labor laws ever here in New York City and in New York State. But
Judaism had no part with that.
well,
they were very
the
respectful and
they had more respect. I wouldn't say that no group has no part in things, but I think it's more accurate to say the Jewish people were some of the first people to respect their women and their children in a different way, to provide a nurturing environment. And interestingly enough, the leaders of the reform movements 100 years ago, after the so-called Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, where many Jewish and Italian immigrant girls were killed, the leaders of that movement, that labor movement that ended some of these atrocious behaviors towards children, towards people who were working in factories, were really primarily Jewish.
that is incredible. What a legacy to bring.
Tremendous
to
legacy.
say that, you know, that, I mean, it's a beautiful legacy, especially with the changes that we had over time to show that the Judaism brought, it's for such a small group, brought such an impactful place. So finally, we've talked about the top the top 5 plus Judaism, and there's so many more to look into, to explore, and talk about. We're just touching the surface so you can get a notion, an idea of what you want to explore more. Let's talk about among these.
Well, can I add one piece,
Yes.
Leigh? Many people are now finding that there's wisdom in each of these religions. And they really are a source, a heritage, if you will, of our birthright as human beings. And each of them has a slightly different focus. So there are an increasing number of people who are interspiritual, who integrate these different teachings in ways that can light up our lives in new ways and can help us grow and progress and evolve as human beings more quickly. So I think this movement towards a more integral understanding of spirituality that can benefit from the wisdom that has come down to us through the ages all across the globe is an opportunity that no other people in human history have ever had.
I love that, and I think that's part of what we'll be talking about coming up in our next segment as well, because we're talking about the notion of what interfaith communities can bring. So stay with us for that. What are the common teachings? What are the common teachings that all of these religions have an underlying message about?
Well, I think some of those teachings are a deep belief that there's something beyond the material world. Beginning with the Enlightenment, we focused a lot on the material world, but to some degree we threw the baby out with the bathwater. There certainly is a lot of superstition that has been harmful, but there also is a subtle energy that permeates all reality. And even when you said we can feel things, we can feel the energy, what is that? So there's a subtle energy that permeates all of reality. And in that energy, when we empty ourselves of all of our demands and desires and predispositions and opinions, we begin to get in touch with the fact that we're all connected. We're connected to each other. We're connected to this deeper source that birthed us all. And when we taste that, there's a deliciousness, a delight.
I feel it. I feel it. And I mean, I even say that in this moment, I can feel the connectedness amongst what we have in this room and beyond. It's palpable, especially whenever there's discussions about it and you connect to these ideas. You can literally feel the connectedness that comes among us.
And we connect to the energy. And when we do that, it's very hard to treat each other poorly. It's very hard to not regard the other as the Messiah, as the Savior, as our brother or our sister. And it changes everything about human life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. This is incredible. This is such an amazing journey, and this is just the beginning. We're going to be right back with Reverend Dr. Jane Galloway, so stay with us. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Happy to be a part of this festival. I know it's a first annual festival, so I'm very excited about that.
It's been a wonderful opportunity, so many different films, different topics, and I've enjoyed it.
I personally had harbored a desire or an ambition to do a film festival, but had not gone about doing anything for it because I knew it was a lot of work and I didn't have the time. So luckily for us, Dennis decided to do it.
I'm very happy to be accepted here at Dennis's great festival, and you know, when you put a lot of work into something and you get acknowledged, it makes you feel good.
I'm so honored to have our next guest. My next guest has a master's in religion focusing on comparative religion and a doctorate in ministry and serves as a spiritual director of Sacred Center, New York. Please help me welcome Reverend Dr. Jane Galloway.
Hi.
So glad you're here. Such an honor.
Hi, everybody. Hi,
Please,
thank you,
please,
thank you.
Please have a seat. Have a seat.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So comparative
Hello.
religion. Hello. I'm
Hi.
assuming that. Tell me what that means when I'm saying.
Well, you just
comparative
had
religion.
a 10 or 15-minute course, which I spent 3 years getting. So somebody ought to get that guy.
So do I get a
Michael Pergola.
master's? Is that?
I hear you're getting a doctorate. I hear you're getting a doctorate bestowed upon you.
On my way. On
Yeah.
my way. So what about New Thought attracted you, having looked at all of these different religions?
Well, I'll tell you, I was raised in a rather traditional path. I was raised as a Presbyterian. My stepfather was a Presbyterian
I know that.
minister, and yeah, so
As a Methodist kid.
yeah, so I was raised in the church. I loved the church I was raised in. That church changed and became much more conservative as I began getting older. But I went through what a lot of kids go through, I think, at age 16, 17, which is that I began to sort of become disillusioned by church and various things that were happening in my family and stuff. So I kind of moved away from religion completely until I went through a crisis in my own life when I was in my late 20s. And I went to a traditional church when I went through this crisis in New York City, a couple of them. And my brother and I were going together. We were like scouting out these churches. So we went to an Episcopalian church. First we went to a Presbyterian church, and we were like, oh no. And we went running out the door. So we were like the people that ministers hate today. It's like, oh my God, what did I say? The poor minister. But I was really searching. I was on a big, deep search, you know. So somebody told me about this guy, Eric Butterworth, who was speaking at Avery Fisher Hall.
I've heard of him.
Yeah,
I've heard
he's
of him.
great.
It's a
He's
name.
great. Masterful teacher who really transcended even his own tradition. He was an incredible metaphysical teacher, scholar, wonderful, interesting person. So he was teaching, he was my introduction to metaphysics, although my mother had been listening to him for years on the radio. So she says she's the introduction to metaphysics, but of course. So I began attending Eric Butterworth. So I began hearing about my own potential, about that spark of the divine that Michael Pergola was talking about. I began hearing about that divorced from all of this doctrinal stuff that was telling me how to act and what to be. I began to hear that I was here to manifest that spark of the divine.
Under what roof was this an idea of, oh, this is a New Thought place or a metaphysics place? Or
It was, well, he was a Unity
attached?
minister, but it was just this guy, Eric Butterworth, is speaking at Avery Fisher Hall, which is at Lincoln Center. So it was a big concert hall. So I think I liked that too because it didn't look like a church at all. So it was the ideas, and I remember his very first talk, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was in 1978. And it was, I remember him talking about creativity, and I was an actress then. And I remember him talking about how to access creativity, yeah, buzzword, but also this deep, you know, I think this deep permission to really allow myself to be as wonderful as Spirit created me to be. And that was a new idea for me. I think that a lot of religion certainly is about how we make sense of life at its deepest level, but also it's about how social constructs kind of help people to move in carefully prescribed ways. And so a lot of religions tell you a lot about what not to do. And if you're a sensitive child, which I think many of us most,
I can relate to that.
You start to hear the don'ts a lot more than you hear the do's.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like, what can I do?
Right.
So I think hearing that was, I don't think it was a total spiritual awakening for me. So I started studying with Eric, and I went probably every week for 10 years. So that was my introduction to New Thought.
And what a big introduction. And what
He was
for
great.
him being such a masterful teacher, for you to meet him in person and not just study him later after the fact, you know, and find out.
You know, one of the things, I think sometimes we are in the presence of genius. Well, we're in the presence of genius tonight. Each one of the people in here is a genius. It's true.
Part
It's
of that,
true. And that's
good.
part of the New Thought teaching, is to really recognize that. And so it's about recognizing that. And so, yes, I realized later what an incredible honor it was to have studied with him. But, you know.
Yeah, let's talk about what New Thought means. So when people hear New Thought.
New Thought. You know, let me just tell you a little bit about the origin of it. There was, in the history of this country and religious movements in this country, there were a couple of times called the Great Awakenings. And it was, I think we're kind of in another one now, really. I mean, I think, don't you think people are waking up in a whole new way?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but the Second Great Awakening was a time when many people were beginning, I mean, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Baptists, and all kinds of a big a surge of spirituality was coming into the United States and England. They started in England. But a movement called, what's his, Henry James wrote the book, William James, excuse me, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And in it, he talks about the mind cure movement. And that was the beginning. This was something that was emerging. Have you ever heard of the word mesmerized? You've been mesmerized by something?
Absolutely, right.
Okay, well, there was a man named Mesmer. And he's the person who was discovering hypnosis. And so what he was beginning to recognize was that you can really drop an idea down deeply into your unconscious, and that if you really drop it down there, you can begin to behave differently. It contacts that place where a lot of things are stored, which we can't access as easily normally. Because they're in what we call, or Freud called, many people call the unconscious, subconscious, et cetera, realm. So Mesmer was the guy who was teaching this mind cure stuff, and a man named Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. He's actually the father of New Thought. And if you try to say that fast 3 times, Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, you get a prize.
Phineas Parker
but
Quimby.
he was a clockmaker. He was a very kind of regular guy. Lived in Maine. And he got involved with, he was also involved in some healing modalities, very frustrated that there were limited healing modalities for people who were suffering from a lot of things.
The doctor, that's all you got.
Yeah,
And then he's
right. And then they had limited anesthesia, et cetera, et cetera. So, but he got turned on to this mesmer technique and this hypnosis technique, and he began to really understand and utilize some of the principles, including hands-on healing. And so he was an interesting, fascinating guy, Quimby. He didn't write down his teachings, but people started to follow him. He went on a kind of a tour, you know, kind of like at your prom, you know, in junior high school, and people are, you know, passing out from hypnosis. But then he began to understand there were deeper somethings that could be dealt with through this. And so he began to realize that through his hands, some kind of healing force was emanating, and he wasn't positive, what is this, what is this? And he began to say, this is what Jesus was manifesting, because Jesus always stretch out your hand.
Right.
Today we call it Reiki. So in case, you know, it's really whatever that power is that comes through us, it's a really healing force, and it's connected straight to the heart and to the ineffable, okay? So he began to realize that this was a tremendous power, and that he was able to utilize it for healing. And one of his students was a woman named Mary Baker Eddy. And she began to write stuff down. So she became the parent of, of Christian Science. Now it's interesting because, and so she then carried his teaching right from there. But she became, again, didactic, or she became dogmatic, I think Michael was saying before, and she tried to put rules and all the same kind of structures onto this emergence of this healing force that was coming. She had a fantastic student. It's so interesting how this person many people don't know about, but she had a huge impact on the spread of the New Thought movement. Her name was Emma Curtis Hopkins, and she had schools all over the country. She really, she had a break with Mary Baker Eddy because she wanted to teach. The Baha'i have a wonderful phrase. They say, worship the light, not the lamp.
Wow.
Worship the light, not the lamp. And that kind of goes, I mean, that's the simplicity of what Michael was talking about earlier. What is the light which translates through all of these many, many different traditions, which are culturally based? So Emma Curtis Hopkins started teaching, and one of Emma Curtis Hopkins' students was a man named Ernest Holmes. And
very well known. I mean, that's
well,
one
to
of the
us,
biggest names.
Because,
exactly,
well, he founded what is now known as religious science. But the Fillmores, too, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, were having personal healing experiences right around the same time. So something I love is, these were 20th century religious movements.
I was just about to say, this is all recent, is what we're talking about. And relatively speaking, when we're looking at the world of religion, this is just so close to where we are today.
Right, absolutely. So they began to recognize, again, this healing, this quickening force, and they created something called Unity School of Christianity. So they call what they do really metaphysical Christianity. Ernest Holmes took it a step further and called it religious science and really made it science of the mind. And he said what mind can conceive, man/woman can achieve. So he realized if you can really get this into your mind. Now what we've learned today is you've got to get it not just into your brain, but you got to get it into your mind. And the mind is bigger than the brain. The mind incorporates your feelings and your really body English behind the whole thing.
I can hear this about feelings too, all right? It's not just the knowledge. He's all about like, separating how you feel from all the, come on, it's all one place. I agree with that.
So anyway, so the New Thought movement grew out of these. So they're kind of different strands of the New Thought teaching. It's interesting because what happened was everything's kind of a corrective of something that came before it, right? So what happened was people who had been into all this feeling thing and rule thing said, no, your mind can change everything. As a man thinketh, so is he. So in some New Thought teaching, like maybe with your dad too, some of the emotion or the spirit of it became divorced. And now there's another movement which is to integrate what Michael was talking about before and what I'm talking about right now with New Thought together into kind of a movement called Ancient Wisdom New Thought. So New Thought becomes a modality for accessing the truths of these ancient teachings. So New Thought is like affirmative prayer. In other words, rather than confessing I'm a terrible person, mea culpa, mea culpa. Affirmative prayer is really stating the truth of the allness that is and really owning that, resonating that, magnetizing that unto yourself. So it's a modality.
And I hear that more commonly today in the idea of stating who you are and talk about even the law of attraction. People bring that into a secular way, in a non-religious way, using what we're talking about, saying this is who I am.
What does secular mean to
you? As I hear it, as I understand it, I always say non-religious. When I think secular, it's the everyday world.
And I think that's again, there are these ideas of a sacred secular split, and in indigenous teachings or in a really holistic understanding of spirit, there is no split to those things.
Exactly. I was about to say, I realized after I said that. There's no difference in the true sense in what I believe personally. I don't believe there's a separation. But in the lexicon of people, we often hear about the separation of, this is what church is. I mean, even the separation of church and state as to what our foundation of our government is built on. There's the church and there's the state, and these are two separate things. But I believe in the flow of how everything is interconnected, just as we are all interconnected, and New Thought being one of these places that brings affirmative action instead of, as you were saying,
affirmative understanding of how to approach prayer, how to approach meditation, how to approach working with these unconscious forces. So
I want to address the idea that I made the mistake of, is saying that New Age is not the same as New Thought. I thought they were the same.
I was
saying, New Age, New Thought.
Honest, New Age, New Thought could be considered. New Thought is thrown in with a lot of the New Age movement. New Age, I know Michael was around during the 60s. You and I are too young for that, but but that is when the New Age movement movement was coming, and I've heard that, you know.
rumors go, stories are that.
Yeah. Well, there was this Summer of Love '67, I'll tell you, which was like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band came out. That was kind of the initiation of the New Age movement, I would say. People were experimenting with all kinds of experiments in consciousness. It's a really interesting, again, a cyclical kind of corrective, because boy, we went back to tremendous conservatism after that, didn't we, for a certain era. But anyway,
yes.
But so people were using mind-expanding drugs and were...
I'm on one right now.
You are?
Yes.
Yeah. I can tell. People were challenging kind of the status quo. Now, the interesting thing is, it was a great mind-expanding era, and what I was just going to say is, that came out of a lot of kids of the era of prosperity, because the 50s and 60s were prosperous times in this country. And so kids weren't having to work in the factory, so a lot of kids had a lot of free time on their hands to expand higher consciousness. Perhaps, yeah, for some people. But so the New Age movement became kind of a compendium of a lot of different ideas, drugs, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and bringing in Eastern ideas, and bringing in a lot of different
exploration.
Exploration,
you know, seeing what is out there. I mean, this is a whole new state of being.
And the New Thought movement is really actually a 20th century religious movement, which started with Quimby and the Fillmores and Ernest Holmes, but then utilized the teachings of the Transcendentalists, so Thoreau and Emerson, etc., and Hindu teachings. Many Hindu teachings and practices were incorporated into the New Thought movement. New Age means, you know, incense and a million zillion things.
Right.
New Thought is really a religious path, and it's a codified religious path. So now there are branches off of New Thought, but they're really different things. I mean, but they're...
And speaking of the branch, we're going to talk about Sacred Center, our branch. We're going to take a break, and we'll come back and talk about Sacred Center. So stay with us.
That's clapping.
I know, really. Your clapping has been spectacular.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here for the first inaugural episode of a brand new show called Still Standing with Ray Wagner.
My mom actually has the recipe for diabetes. That's how deadly our food is.
It's like, you know what? I don't think I have an eating problem. Well, your car is filled with White Castle wrappers and stuff. Really?
I feel like a lesbian from like the 80s comic. I'm distracted right now.
Honestly, I'm just hoping not to die alone so my cat doesn't eat my remains.
You can't marry a deaf girl though, man. I don't want blood on my hands. The TV gets so bad actually in the future. At one point we just hand over a camcorder to a bunch of Guidos and watch them get hepatitis for 12 episodes.
I want to thank everyone for being here. That's another episode of Still Standing with Ray Wagner. I'm Ray Wagner. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
We're back now with Reverend Dr. Jane Galloway, and we're going to talk about the beautiful New Thought Church that I also attend, Sacred Center. So thank you so much for coming to Sacred Center as well. And
You're welcome. My great pleasure.
So grateful. So what is Sacred Center in as part of the New Thought movement? How does it?
Well, you know, as I was saying earlier, the New Thought movement kind of branched off into more formal denominations, kind of like the Church of Religious Science and Unity. Then different churches began to kind of, there was divine science. There are many different branches of New Thought. But also there have been independent movements in New Thought. And Sacred Center is one such movement. It was founded by August Gold, and it was right just before 9/11. It was really an idea that was clearly supposed to come through at a very specific time for a very specific healing for a city and really, I think, a world. So she started like 2 days, I think, before 9/11.
Right.
And so then, of course, the city was in great need of spiritual healing. And so these ideas were coming forth. A lot of times we're serving something and we're not sure exactly what it is, so you just keep following, you know, the path and knowing. So August created this community based on some universal principles, very Tao-like principles, very much that Wei Wu Wei thing that you were talking about before. You know, everything happens to you, happens for you, kind of. Mm-hmm. So and so that's how Sacred Center began. And over the years, the community has grown with a fantastic group of really creative artists, people who are, many of them are leaving more traditional religious walks and looking for the kind of relief and inspiration that I found through Eric Butterworth, but in a form where the arts are much more a part of the mix. And so wouldn't you say that that kind of describes the community?
Certainly,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah.
Artistic
Fantastic.
is huge about it. The one
Yeah.
piece at 2 o'clock of it being a time means that some people on Broadway
I
won't be able
know,
to come
can't
and
get
sing
there.
for us. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, goodness.
Or just come to service. But
nonetheless,
we'll
we still have a very talented artistic and music
Fantastic.
community.
Really, really talented
that
community.
is huge.
So it's a community where study is a big component, learning about prosperity principles, learning about basically the teachings that are presented in many New Thought communities. But with a special twist, because it has this real influence of the Tao. It also was a very strongly personality-driven movement to begin with. And so now what's happening is, like with many, many startup movements, nonprofits and churches and religious movements go through developmental cycles. If you Google it, you'll find 1,000. If you look up life cycles of nonprofits, they start with big charismatic startups and then have a big burst of energy. Something happens, the charismatic leader moves on, then you go through a period of like, okay, who are we? What are we going to do? And then there's a period of kind of deepening and growing into regeneration and reorganization. And so that's where Sacred Center is right now, kind of understanding how we define ourselves as a community.
What a special place to be that we're getting right now is a time at Sacred Center where they're deepening and we're growing and just making decisions on what's next.
Yes.
So what does Sacred Center offer to the New York community?
Well, first of all, a fantastic worship service. I mean, a fabulous worship service.
Truly.
Yeah, I mean, right. And let's not even call it a worship service. It's a service where we come to access, where people come to access deeper teachings of many of these traditions that Michael was talking about before in a New Thought context. We have a fantastic choir. There's a great community of volunteerism there as well, people who really are doing a lot of great work with kids. We have an All About Youth program that's doing some really creative and fantastic stuff with youth in the community.
Amazing, and I wish more people would know about it because I think It's All About Youth program is so stellar what they're doing.
Yeah,
they are
well,
so
they will.
focused.
They will. We're going to talk more about it, so
Oh.
we'll get it out there. More people know more about the program, and so also we have classes, and there are classes in prosperity. There are classes in foundational teachings, much like Michael was talking about earlier, kind of the
She
foundational
hosts
teaching.
one of these, the foundational
right, a couple of
classes,
them.
which
We
is
have classes
amazing.
in spiritual practices and principles. We're bringing in a whole layout of classes for the fall under 4 categories: arts and spirituality, core classes, health and wholeness, and life skills. And so we're going to have 4 different areas. So it's going to be a place where you can come and learn about how to live your life in a practical sense. I mean, how to not only understand prosperity principles, but then how to manage your money. That's a different skill from how to manifest the right?
Manifest it and then manage it,
and then
so you don't
manage
lose
it,
it all,
and then
yeah.
how to give back. How do we really become givers in the community? And so we're going to be learning more about that and understanding. You know, there is a law of circulation, a law of reciprocity, not just the law of attraction. You can't just attract. You've got to cycle it, right?
Yes.
So there are going to be a lot of opportunities for that. We're looking at doing some community outreach work with groups, you know, in various parts of the city, introducing New Thought through the arts.
Oh, thank goodness for that.
So,
It's such a way to connect for people as well.
Exactly.
We're very in tune with that.
Welcome to the pregame, everyone. This is our first episode. This is a very important talk show where we answer important questions like...
Do I look fat, and where did I put my drink?
Well, right. My name is Austin Helms. With me, as always, is Alexander X. And also...
Who are you again?
Lola Cabana.
Oh, Lola Cabana.
I want to take this time to I'm incredibly grateful for Reverend Michael Pergola and Reverend Dr. Jane Galloway for coming. The messages you gave were so enlightening. And just the beginning, I want to reiterate, this is just the beginning of all of these topics and all this conversation that you can begin to have on the top world religions, including ones we didn't even talk about. You can find more information about both of these folks and their organizations. For One Spirit, his website is onespiritlearning.org or onespiritinterfaith.org. This is the One Spirit Learning Alliance. There are a lot of activities, conferences, workshops. They're going to be going to India, and you're welcome to join in. They have lectures. There's meditation retreats, everything you can imagine at One Spirit. for any kind of interfaith conversation, as well as at Sacred Center. You can find out more information about Sacred Center at www.sacredcenterny.org, where you can get copies of any of the messages and talks that Reverend Jane has done, as well as any of the history of what Sacred Center is about and our bylaws and what our belief systems are and all of that. Also, everyone in our audience is going to go home with MP3s from both of them of some of their talks. So congratulations. Thank you so much for coming. We're very grateful for you. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back after this. So stay with us.
Good evening, and welcome everyone to the first ever taping of The Fog of Time. We're coming to you live from Long Island City, right underneath the 7 train. We're going to be bringing you guests from throughout time and bring them here in the studio and let them answer questions in their own words.
I ended up in jail for it, as you often do, when you're trying to completely take over a country.
I don't drink or eat blood.
Okay, well.
I bathe in blood.
You bathe in blood,
I bathe in blood.
You bring him in, I kill him now. I'll tell you this.
I am a free spirit, as they call it, you know.
Because you capitalist pigs, you don't understand.
But I hope from watching this show, you got to see a little bit of what was underneath that. And I hope you tune in next time as we delve into more characters like that. Have a good night.
Today has been incredibly insightful, incredibly motivating, and I cannot wait for next episode. I want to give one truth to wrap up today's episode, though, and that is truth exists regardless of belief or consciousness. Regardless of what you accept, the truth is still the truth. And I say truth meaning with a capital T. One truth for all of us. We're all interconnected. There is only one truth. And feel it and find it. You can always find anything about this show on us at egarage.tv where you're watching this. Follow us on Twitter at AbsolutelyTV. You can Facebook us at our new Facebook page, facebook.com/AbsolutelyTV. Email us with anything you're curious about. Talk to me at AbsolutelyTV.com. All of this you can find on our website. So thank you so much for tuning in. I look forward to next time, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you.